Welcome to SaviTalk, where conversations aren't just talk, they're the start of something more. Let's get rooted, let's get real. And of course, you can't have a conversation by yourself. Although with these guys, sometimes I'm wondering maybe I should just have a conversation by myself, but I don't. Got my friends here. We got Simon.
I'm Simon Gooch, I'm the field CEO, and I'm worried because and you'll see in a minute what I'm referring to, I may no longer be the eye candy for this week's show.
We got Enrique.
Hi guys, Enrique here, SVP of Strategist, Savient, and let's rock and roll.
This episode, guys, we got some titans coming in to have some conversations.
Sure. Well-dressed titans. Larry just preface that from the start.
I saw the shoe of one. You gotta step up.
These are custom.
Okay, they are custom. But then the other one, it's socks, right? It's this thing, right? Which I got to see what kind of socks he has now because he's always got different kind of stylish socks.
So there's amazing wardrobe, but those guys are legends. Yes, I'm very excited.
More than just wardrobe.
More than wardrobe.
Yeah, more than just they actually have some things to say and are pretty smart about some areas.
Yes. Does that work? I genuinely thought if you just dressed well and
listen,
that's all you needed to do.
Listen, dress well, make stuff up, say it authoritatively, and most people usually believe you. It's gotten me this far, so. But I think I'm excited to have this conversation with these guys. I really want to get into just,
So it's two guests.
future. It's two guests. Yeah, maybe a third.
All right.
Yeah, this lovely water we got here. But I'm really interested in just having this conversation, just the future of. I like talking about future conversation, future of identity security. Where do we see it going?
I love that.
And just cybersecurity in general, right?
Love it.
I think
Yes.
with these guests in between us, we're gonna have close to over 6 decades of experience in it.
Yeah, what if?
Not-
What if?
And that's just Simon, but the rest of us, we can kind of really talk about what we've seen and how this has kind of transitioned. These are some good conversations.
Do you know those guests?
I genuinely don't know them, so I'm super interested to hear what they've got to say. And also because, honestly, my perspective, right? I always think, I'd love to have a slightly broader conversation today because, identity, kind of interesting. Sometimes it can get a little bit insular, right? I'm genuinely interested to see, can we broaden the conversation a little bit as well?
Yeah.
Because the future is not tied to the past of identity, because the past of identity it's fairly myopic.
Very true.
It's been self-fulfilling for quite a long time. So I'm interested to hear about, how is it going to evolve? Because, we have this conversation we talk a lot about identity security, and it's not just a word.
Yes.
The security bit of that is the important thing,
Yeah.
right? Identity is just an adjunct to that, I think, And honestly, I don't think that we push that enough at the moment. I don't think there's enough understanding that identity is just a component of security.
Yeah, those guys are celebrities, and I think, Simon, it's nice that it's going to be fresh for you because I'm a little bit starstruck. So if I go sideways, please check me, Simon.
Don't stand up, just keep seated.
I will.
All right, let's get to the conversation, folks. All right, and so we've got two legendary titans like we talked about, Mr. Ian Glazer and Richard Byrd, also known as the Godfather of Identity.
Who is it?
Richard.
He's the hardest working man in identity for sure. He's got to go.
I mean, yeah,
The sole godfather of identity.
Who do you not talk to? Who do you rubbed out to get there? That's the question.
There's a long list. So it might be too.
That was a great opening, David. Congratulations.
yeah, that's got a different connotation over on this side of the pond there, Simon. But anyway, moving on.
And okay, the only guys who brought us gifts.
Right?
Cheers, guys.
Just lovely springy water. San
Francisco's finest.
Salute. It's like New York water. They say you just got to taste it. Go ahead.
Talk among ourselves.
All right, so Ian, we're going to start with you. Actually, we're going to come out swinging, dude. So we had a conversation, and this goes back to, I think it was December when you made this post, but basically you want to redefine everything about identity schema and take us back to 1990 when we did LDAP in that org person, but do it for identity. Go.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So,
Can we just leave it a yes? I'm good with that.
I mean, we could, but yeah.
good.
We got to get the rest of the details.
But here's the thing. So 20 some odd years, identity has been laboring under an enormous hangover, which is socks. And we were just slowly being like, oh God, what did we do last weekend? And sort of this realization of maybe we need to do some things differently. as part of that, one of the things that we haven't done in 20 some odd years is actually think about the data that we're working with. And what that means is that every single product, whether you build it or you buy it, has a proprietary data model. And we treat it as some sort of holy distillate of mana.
Yeah.
The problem is we're identity people. We are not data people. We comedically suck at managing data. If we suck at managing data, it means that we can't do modern things like bring your own AI model, bring a third-party AI model to it. We actually have a really big problem when it comes to data and identity. One of the reasons why this is the case is because we actually don't have standards for what would be a universal data model for IAM. And if we could just take a couple of pieces, now I know this is a ridiculous windmill to go tilt at, but if we took a couple of pieces of those things and just start there, I actually think you could build a better, healthier, both vendor ecosystem and customer ecosystem by opening up this information, by opening up the data, allowing data professionals, people that actually know what they're doing, as opposed to us clowns, actually to help and help the problems that the enterprise serve and actually get better outcomes. So yeah, I am all in on this one.
That's a great answer, Ian. And I want to ask you something, because for the two people out there that don't know you, right, would you mind perhaps just give us a context, so a little bit of background, who you are for that two?
Well, my name is Richard Bird, and I'm the godfather, if I get it. Oh, wait. Sorry, I was reading the card. I got that wrong. Okay. So as I would often say, I'm Ian, and it's my fault. I have been around the identity industry for a mumble number of years, and along the way have been a Burton Group analyst and a Gartner analyst. I ran identity at Salesforce for a long time. I have been involved in creating IDPro, the Professional Association for Digital Identity Management, as well as DIAP, the Digital Identity Advancement Foundation. And I have made a ton of mistakes, see SPML, and I've learned from those. I've gotten better, become a better person because of it.
Thank you, Ian.
That was your idea?
It wasn't my idea per se. It was technically Darren Rawls, and I was just along for the ride. So we can blame Darren because he's not here.
Well, yeah. The time is
Darren, if you're watching, it's your fault.
I think we blame Darren for a lot of things.
I think Derek was right for a lot of things. Okay, no, that was a Larry. That was Larson.
Richard, why don't you
So
give us the...
yeah, I try all the time to demystify this whole reputation that I have in identity. Really, my perspective has always come from the standpoint of being the dirty operator in identity. So I've been in technology for 31 years this year. I started out in IT ops, and I actually started out in payment processing, and that led into banking. I did check processing, just like the worst parts of banking. Like if you think, there's no dirt in banking, go to a check processing center or a cash vault. They're gross, right? So I did all of that, and I became a CIO, and then I was invited back into JP Morgan Chase, where I had been previously working, to join the very beginnings of centralized information security. And this is an absolute true story. So it's been about 15 years that I've been involved with identity. And when I showed up, you have to think about the time frame. 15 years ago, we're clawing identity away from mainly Windows engineers.
Yeah, network.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
and the network side. And we don't have anything that looks like standardized authentication, federation, SSO. Like none of this is extant. We're just starting to think about it. And literally, when I showed up and had my job interview to join this information security team, the person who's become one of my best friends and is a legend herself in security and banking, she goes, "Hey, there's only one job left. It's identity, and nobody wants it." And that is how this journey started. And so my experience with identity that has led to this interesting reputation is really more about the ugly, dirty, evil underside of identity and kind of like figuring out how to make it better, but then also operating a massive scale. We were talking in the green room, like one of my very first things that I ever did in identity was backing 87,000 Windows production servers. Why? Because
That's where your hair went.
yeah, exactly. Exactly, because Chase has enough money to land people on the moon, right? And so we embarked on this stupid, exercise, and I only became good at identity because I took a massive amount of beatings and accumulated a massive amount of bruises and injuries, and I learned a lot of things. Now here's the kind of the round off to my experience and being a participant in the identity community, which I love and adore. The reality is that I can't tell you that I see much different in identity until about the last 12-ish months or so than I saw 15 years ago when I first came into it, right? We have typically not used security language, although the last I checked in NIST, we're actually a security control domain, right?
Yeah, like identity people talk about threat detection. That's kind of new, right?
Exactly. So I remember the first time I ever suggested that we should use the term attack surface to reference identities and the users attached to those identities. And I remember an executive saying, "We can't call our people an attack surface." And I'm like, "Why not?"
At them?
Exactly. Like, I think of it the old days of identity is the new perimeter. Many of you heard me say this on keynote platforms. I was like, if identity is the new perimeter, then Bob in accounting is the new port 80, right? And I use that shtick today, and I have an entire generation of practitioners that don't even know what port 80 means.
Yes.
Right. And so this is a very interesting set of environmental circumstances. But, like I said, to round it off, it is nice to see a move towards identity security and a move away from the failed reality of identity access administration. Access administration is a business function, right? Identity security is a control domain. And unfortunately, we have munged those two terms together for so long that it's taken until 2025 for us to realize they're not the same thing, right? We, as practitioners, we know they're not the same thing, right? But people tend to just generalize identity as something that you have to do and don't really reconcile it to the security side of the equation. So that's been my, kind of journey through all this.
It's funny because I've only been in identity 6-7 years, and I've always thought, because in fact, every time you said something, I kept thinking, yeah, identity people are just unloved, right? I mean, that's what kept popping into my head for some reason. Unloved and unwanted, maybe. And I would agree that that's changing, but honestly, I'm a skeptic as to how much it can change, because, and I need to be careful what I say now, when I talk to identity people, it is like pulling teeth in terms of trying to get them to think about any of them. Talk about security, and we talk about identity security, and trying to explain what that means is a struggle. And I don't really
can you define identity security for me? Because I don't think it actually has a definition. I'm sorry.
I don't think it does either. I think it, go on.
No.
The question was to you.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah. No. Don't.
For me,
Don't dodge
for
that.
me, for me,
Are you finished?
I am.
because you can answer it if you are.
You go ahead.
For me, it's about just thinking about what you do differently. I mean, you can define that in many different ways. But for me, it's thinking, well, one of the fundamental things for me, and perhaps people don't think about this in security, but from my background, I try to think of it in service terms. I mean, you were kind of touching upon it. It's not about running some monolithic thing in the background and being hidden away and hoping that no one asks you any questions and that you don't have to really do anything that matters. It's about thinking it as a fundamental service that is impactful for whatever the critical nature is of your business. So I actually think, when I think about identity security, I think about any security in the context of the impact it has. And for me, I actually always start with service. I was gobsmacked when I started working in identity, and I started talking about, for my background, kind of classic way you thought about how you deliver technology and the impact it had, which is not about the thing you're doing, it's about the outcome it has. And everyone talks about outcome and blah, 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 it's really boring. But like it just wasn't a conversation. And I don't think that identity professionals have changed that much in terms of how they think about the thing they're doing in terms of what it does. And I always refer back to what it does from a service perspective, the impact it has, how is it consumed?
But that sounds like you haven't talked to anyone who deals in SIAM and consumer-facing identity.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
But elaborate on that. So what do you think of the answer, Ian, and how would you answer your own question?
First off, I don't think identity security is a thing.
right?
How do
Because if identity security is a thing, then security privacy is a thing, which makes privacy identity a thing. 3 legs of the stool.
Yeah.
3 legs of the stool. Identity is the thing that provides valuable context for security to make response determinations. Identity is the way that privacy operationalizes the controls it needs to make. And so this is a tripart relationship. I think identity security is not a thing. It is purely a marketing artifact. Now, it is important, very important, that we recognize the security capabilities that identity can bring to the table as a set of controls. But identity is far bigger than that, because if you look at all of the consumer-facing identity stuff, that's about business enablement, that's about revenue generation. So I really don't like the identity security term because I don't think it's actually a thing.
So I want to just, and people are always like using this on the bingo card when Richard speaks. Well, I'll pull on that thread on that sweater a little bit. All right, hold on. All right.
Check. Okay, cool.
So
Got my B.
yeah, so I'm not disagreeing with you. I do think that we tend to get sucked into the taxonomy of the day, right? Whether we get to define it as a domain or not, right? So, obviously we're sitting in a place right now where AI is, being defined as a taxonomy all around it. It's all kind of marketing labels and everything like that. And now I'm in AI proper from a security standpoint, and there's the same argument going on. Is it AI security or is it security for AI? And that's what I'm curious about. I don't disagree with you about identity security, but it kind of rotates back from taxonomically to security for identity, right? Is that a thing? Because I strongly believe that it is, right? And I think this problem with word salad is that we see identity security being adopted as a marketing term,
Right.
right? When in reality, what we're talking about. So when you ask me what's security for identity, I'm pretty draconian based upon experience.
Right.
Doesn't apply to the SIAM side, and I'm going to be very conscious of that, right?
Although there are implications, but I know exactly where you're going on that. Yep.
Because I technically built one of the first SIAM solutions in the enterprise at Chase when I was asked to do so for high net worth and asset wealth management. We didn't have any platforms to do that, right? So I'm conscious of the SIAM exclusion here, but when we look at security for AI, the draconian perspective is zero standing privilege.
Right.
Right? If you don't have it, it's the most safe and secure thing ever, right? But when you mention things like zero standing privilege, or when you mention things like, attack surface management for identities, everybody starts to get a little crazy. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because the immediate expectation is that it introduces friction. It's going to inconvenience operations. It's going to, and this is where I think,
And that's exactly where the Mother May I style of managing privilege has cast forward a horrible reputation for identity. Yeah. It doesn't have to be like that, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, exactly. So it's and as we kind of like start to augur into this idea of security for identity, we have to be really, really honest as identity practitioners, and frankly, everybody in the security domain or security space, regardless of domain, has to agree that we basically have done F all around the authorization plane, right? And to be honest with you, by the time you get past authentication, which has proven to be fairly easy, all the bad stuff happens at the fine-grained tier associated with these identities. And yet there's very little focus or discipline relative to what we need to do for security improvements in that authorization layer, right? If we even think about how auth and auth works in an API, and APIs are the transport layer for AI, when we look at that, we go, well, wait, all of these accesses to all of these specific data elements and services are basically through an instantiated, static, never rotating JOT token at the end of this thing.
What could possibly go
What
right?
could possibly go right? Exactly. And so I think that, when I look at it, it really is applying the first principles of security to the securitization of identities is really what we're talking about. But that's too long to fit on the marketing.
Well, it absolutely is. But I think there's a little bit of nuance in that. In that, there's set of controls that identity practitioners can bring to a conversation, because you know better than anyone, there's never one control for a concern. There's never one control you select for a risk that you want to mitigate. It's about what is the sort of library that you're going to weave together of these controls to have a certain kind of risk against your risk tolerance. I think the practice of doing identity management more securely is another side of this story. Like, identity tools for a long time have absolutely devalued their data exhaust, right? Having running telemetry on what you've been provisioning, what's been authenticated, what tokens you've been issued, we've sort of tossed that over the transom because we were not great at data.
Yeah.
And so there's so much to take from that. There's so much richness that now we're starting to see companies starting to be like, oh, but wait a minute, there's something there. We should maybe look at that.
And I think it's, so I'm gonna tie something in that kind of Simon was sitting at, and you're right? Like when he said, like, you haven't seen much change in identity practitioners, right? There's a reason for that. So if we go back, when we built whatever this industry is and we aimed it, right, we took it to people who were about as far away from security as you could possibly be, right? And so the reason why we end up getting terms like identity security and all these things is because we basically had to teach advanced level physics to third graders. And so I couldn't come in and go, well, let me start with this algorithm. And it's like, wait, what? Right? So we had to, that's where it started, right? Because we couldn't get, at the time when this thing started, we couldn't get security to buy off on it. And so we as an industry pointed to the one place where we can go get money, which was audit and compliance. So we said, we're gonna go over here. And so now we're dealing with business analysts who don't give a crap about anything you're talking about. It's just, I got this thing, I gotta do it, I want it done, make it look like a spreadsheet. And that's where we started. And so we couldn't even have this nuance of a conversation because they would get lost, they wouldn't write the checks, and nothing would get done. And so over the last 2 or 3 decades, we've had to slowly bring that along to where, right, it's only in the last decade that we could actually have sales cycles where we weren't spending the first 3 conversations educating a customer on what is identity and identity management.
But don't you think that's where and so for me, identity security, I agree, right? It's just a construct for having a different conversation.
Yes.
To me, that's all it is, actually. It enables the positioning, I think, in terms of what you were just saying. It just enables us to continue that conversation in terms of, go.
No. So one thing I wanted to think about, assuring both of you, is one of the failures that we've had in identity is around the way we communicate about what we can do, what we do, and what we should be doing.
Yep.
And it is a language conversation, right? And so sharing an analyst background, you know that, like, when you get your edits back from a document,
Peer reviews.
The peer reviews were brutal for a reason, because the things we needed to communicate, or we should be communicating, needed to be clear and understandable and consumable by the people that needed to hear it. The problem was we never really learned that lesson very well. Case in point, identity's relationship with developers and DevOps has never been very strong. It's a constituency we never served well, but have a lot of ability to serve.
Incredibly problematic now, Ross. Because with agentic AI and all of that stuff. Now actually...
Hold on, I got another bingo card.
But it doesn't really matter. Whichever one of those constructs you want, they have now expanded the world in which we have influence and impact in a way that most identity people don't understand.
Right.
They genuinely have no concept of what's going on over there. And in fact, most people don't want you involved in it because you have no concept and no understanding of the problem you'll cause if you try and apply some of your current kind of thinking and the way that you control stuff. So I just see that problem as accelerating. And I don't really understand, which is why this is such an interesting topic for me, because I don't understand how we change that dynamic to help go solve a set of problems that at the moment we're not on a trajectory to solve.
And let me ask you this, because number one, I agree very much that getting enamored by the taxonomy is not very helpful, right? But what's the problem at hand that we need to solve? I think that's where Simon is getting. So to your point, Richard, you said, yes, I do understand protecting or the protection of identity. That thing can be compromised. That thing can be bypassed. That thing could be misused, right? So if it's not something that exists in like an yin and yang type of thing, so we protect identity, but we also use identity to protect, what both of you think would be the best way, and now thinking in a greater sense of cybersecurity, right?
Well, I think we need to go bigger than cybersecurity.
Yeah, but just let me finish the question.
There's a false frontier.
Because I think you know the answer too, Simon. But the question is, what do you think would be the best approach, especially thinking 30 years, right, in the past and trying to predict 30 years into the future? Because we've been through mainframes, and we've been through cloud, and now this wave of AI and whatever, right? So what is the constant? And I think that's the hypothesis I get, Ian, is that the only constant among all those different type of IT infrastructure models that we saw is identity. So what will be the best way to protect ourselves the next 30 years? That's the question I want to ask both of you. Perhaps Ian, you can start.
Well, I want to actually like do this, not a softball pitch, more of a hardball pitch here. Bring it. Because my perspective, like I said, kind of in a lead up here, what's that? Well, my perspective is still from the dirty pragmatic operator seat, right? What I think we have done wrong in identity, I think where the future is indicating we can do better is, and you've heard me say this multiple times, right? I think people in cybersecurity in general, which is a very interesting construct. John Kenderbank says, what's a cyber and why are we protecting it, right? I still believe strongly in information security and transactional security and those things.
Yeah.
Like when I look at, this world that we're in an identity, we have trained too many people not to ask the obvious question, right? So if we think about the future of identity, there's one interesting obvious question. Emailer Heather Flanagan, I'd love the name drop because these are great names and people in the industry. We've talked about why does nobody authenticate on log out or session end, right? Think about it for high risk, high exposure type accesses. Like, why is it that people are able to capitalize from an attack standpoint on unclosed sessions that the exit of the identity was never verified?
I have a theory on this. We love the user so much, and it's like young love, where you're like, no, you hang up first. No, you hang up. We never actually close the session.
Right. Well, so
It's a theory. I don't think it's a good one, but it's a theory.
no, I think it's a great theory. It's better than anything I've heard before. But I think we don't ask the obvious questions. We in the identity trades want to go directly to the most complicated fringe use case questions. In the meantime, we're like, why wouldn't I, in a high risk scenario, just simply authenticate on exit, right? Think about what that would do to improve my overall security posture. It would be substantial, right? It's not exponential. It's not light years, right? But it's a great beginning step. Now, I want to go to SIAM as the second piece of this, right? So if we can't answer the question, why don't we authenticate on high risk accesses on logout? Why don't we ever ask the question, hey, all of my company business leaders, if we are really serious about privacy and the requirements associated with privacy, why does our customer access management approach suck so bad, right? This is a very obvious question. If you are stating, I am going to meet privacy expectations or requirements, protect my customers' information, protect their personal information, then do I have a customer access management framework that actually facilitates that? And I will tell you, you could walk into 999 out of 1,000 companies in the Fortune 1000, and if you've looked at their SIAM program, you would be able to say strongly, you do not believe in privacy.
And underlying that is a challenge to actually manage data and associate with lineage and associate with preference and associate with rights.
Yes.
And the interesting thing, and this is another name drop, Steve Wilson point, which is, as identity practitioners, we have thought that our data is somehow magically special and different. It's data, right? And so what we haven't done is enlisted the fullness of the tool sets that have been evolving to help us do these things better. And that absolutely has got to change.
Yep.
I think that's easy to understand, Ian, and I think even the audience can understand that. So yes, I think we all agree that we have a data problem in identity, which is from sanitation and hygiene and all that kind of basics. And I think it goes back to what Richard said. I don't quite get maybe if you dodge the question of what's the advice would you give? Okay, if we're planning your organization to be protecting itself for the next 30 years, what is it? If it's not identity security, then what is it?
No, look, there's this really amazing potential and opportunity for the entire identity. I'm very specific. The identity security domain, right? I'm going to be like NIST, ISO, like they have told us, and many of the people in our community that have been part of the standards bearers organizations, they have told us that identity is a component of security.
Yes.
Right. Really fascinating. So when I came over to the solution side, and I only worked at 1.5 identity solutions companies. I've been in API security now in AI security, because I was a multi-domain CISO, right? I'm not a one-trick pony in the identity space. Sometimes I have to remind a lot of people of that. Like in the startup community, what I'm seeing is the security solutions that are gaining traction and winning are built on a new model.
Okay.
And it is a model that plays so well for us in identity, specifically around the data piece, where security companies are achieving scale and capability and valuations. And I think specifically of Wiz, right? Is Wiz didn't do anything different except take information from all of these sources, bring it together, data, and then put additive information that created contextualized data. Now, if we think about all of the security feeds that are coming out of all of these different systems that are not part of the identity domain, there's still a lot of missing information there. What the hell is missing in identity data? We have information about everybody.
That's the goodness.
From so many sources, but we do not contextualize it.
I'll tell you what I think.
Protection, but because we were having this conversation with a customer the other week, and they were challenging us because we were trying to push that point a little bit. And
I think identity is more complex than cloud security.
Well, no, but their position was, but identity is just a subcomponent. So hey, like that's an interesting perspective that you just raised. But their pushback was, but like they're not going to be the master.
So which is funny. Let's think about that for just a second. It's a subcomponent. I do think that this is the stigma that we labor with in identity, right? I don't know if anybody can disprove one simple reality about identity. There is no pathway from the analog you to the digital proxy representation of you in the digital world that does not go through identity. It is the prime.
That's the common denominator that we've talked about.
What's the issue? Why is that? How do we solve the disconnect there? So, because I agree, and I think if you spent long enough talking to someone, they wouldn't say, "Well, that doesn't make any sense." So, what's the problem?
So you guys have all been kind of hinted at it, and I'm gonna go. So I'm gonna take it I'm gonna take it an even bigger step, right? Like when you look at what we've done with information technology, right? The moment we shifted to information technology, meaning what? We collected a whole bunch of data, and whether it's databases, whatever said, we put data, and then we said, oh, we're gonna build these applications on top of it and interact with it. And the thing about, I think it's just kind of like the human experience is if I put something in front of you and give you no guardrails or whatever, you're just gonna take what's there. Most people, like if I offer you something, like you just take it. The average person doesn't really think to go, oh, well, here's 5 things. I'm just gonna grab the things I need, right? Some people will, but the average person will just go, I'm giving you, okay, I'll take all 5 things. That's what we did with data in these systems. Where am I going with this, right? So when you start to pull on that thread, and I've actually done this before and gotten yelled at by so many people, it was hilarious because apparently there's just this relationship that they have with data. I'm like, we've taken this greedy attitude of data, like I want all of it. Well, why? I don't know, but I might need it later, or I might need it here, or I might need it there. So we just gotten so used to building systems and applications where we just take in all the data and we keep it and then we operate on it and we do whatever we need to do, right?
Yeah.
But when you want to start getting to how do we go and secure about this, and we kept pushing the data problem down the pike. Oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. But when you really get down to it and you say, I love what you talked about, like, let's get back to actually what real security is, like authentication and transaction security. What do you need to complete this job, right? If I need to authenticate somebody, what is the data that I actually need, right? I may only need 2 or 3 pieces of things. And then what's the cost of actually getting that data, right? And that's when you start thinking that way, you start to get into this really deep kind of transactional models like, well, do I need to store anything? Do I need to store a bunch of HR data? Like, why when you go to a company, why do they have all this information about me? Oh, it's for HR reasons. We got to be able to pay you. All you need to know to pay me is my account number and to do the transaction and verify that that's me. You don't need to store my address and everything else about me and my next of kin and my emergency contact. Now, you may not need that. You may need that for other reasons, but you don't need to store it all the time. But that's we're talking 30, 40 years now. We have told the industry, this is how you build applications. And now when we want to secure all this stuff, the answer is, well, we got to pull all this stuff back out. And people are like, over my cold, dead hands, will I let you have all of my data? Why?
You know who rides shotgun with that very same mentality? If you want all the data, what do you need? All the access, all the time, right? Standing access was born of that similar mentality, which is like, well, look, that DevOps engineer probably needs to be able to do a thing no matter what time of day it is. Really? There's a duty roster that says when that DevOps engineer should actually be doing a thing. Maybe we should consult that before we say, here you go nuts.
Yeah, but I want to be real pointed, Enrique, in answering your question about who wins in the next 30 years in identity specifically, and who wins universally because identity gets...
No, in cybersecurity.
Well, yeah, but I go back to what you said, right? Which is, I do not believe that identity is isolated to cybersecurity.
I agree.
Right. I think it is an enabler, but it requires something that will be the definitional characteristic of the next wave. Because I hate using that next gen term. The next wave.
Is it a paradigm shift? There you go. All right.
Is it a paradigm shift left or shift right? Shift center. I love the groans.
Middle out.
Yeah. So
You had to.
So this rise of solutions and security that are, and I think this also answers your question about when does identity take its rightful place. And I am total Don Quixote on this, right? I think that my entire life's mission is to put identity in its rightful place on the throne of both security and operations and business value,
Right next
and customer privacy. Exactly, right next to Galeazzi. And when we talk about this notion of contextualized data, and I'm being very clear that there are companies across the entire spectrum of security that are doing this. What it yields is the thing that identity doesn't talk about and what has been missing. And that is a source of truth. When identity solutions become a source of truth versus a source of record, then source of truth is unobtainium, right? Source of truth is, and when people ask me, and I love your questions about like define identity security for me, when I raise this point and I go, look, like when we are able to achieve a solution that it is delivering a source of truth, what that means is that information about that identity, about that entity, about those privileges, about those entitlements does not need to be verified. It does not need to be validated. It does not need to be cross-checked. It doesn't need a stupid quarterly certification. It is just simply true.
It stays true, it is true, and remains true.
It becomes so valuable. There's this interesting trend now happening in security where companies that are achieving the source of truth, they know that they've achieved it because every customer looks at them and says, this data is really cool. Can I move it to Splunk? This data is really cool. Can I move it to another analytical system? This data is not. Why? Because that data has achieved that oil class of value, right? We have not even begun to even crack that cube in identity. But the instant that you do, think about the power of identity being a source of truth. We now become the hub that we rightly deserve to be, and everything else radiates spokes from it because that value of information. And think about that in the customer context. One single customer record of truth, and not
The holy grail of CDPs.
There you go. There you go, right? And I think that we've actually entered a time in technology where this type of utopian possibility could happen. But it's going to take a tremendous amount of rethinking about how we're structuring and architecting security and identity together. Right?
But it's interesting to do that in an era that is post-truth and not yet peak deepfake, right? And so it is a very interesting problem to understand that maybe what adversaries will be doing in a future state is not so much making lookalikes of David to call the help desk to get a password reset, but more about we're going to attack systems of truth
Yep.
and undermine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, because if they're valuable enough to be the unobtainium and the oil,
Then that's where the money is.
that is where the
That's where they'll go.
target will shift to. Of course. Right. But that's always the case. Everything that manifests of increased value in any culture, any civilization, any timeline becomes the thing that everyone wants. The tulip bulbs in Holland, right? Just the craziest things that get associated to something that is so valuable.
Beanie babies.
There you go. Beanie Babies.
Beanie babies.
I like the source of truth.
That was the answer I was looking for. Thank you, Richard. Because we think about the solution for the 30 years into the future, but also the attacks will change, and what's valuable is going to change as well.
So,
But
last question.
I want to go back to one point in there because I mean that makes absolute sense to me. But I still, for me, the biggest anchor in that is still honestly the people in identity, being able to drive that vision because that makes absolute sense, But how do we help? How do we educate the people to make sure that we can drive to get there?
I think that.
Because I don't know how we change that.
Yeah, I think that everybody, to kind of round out the conversation, should contribute an observation to this. To be honest with you, we have never in the identity space. What I love about IDPro is we created a standard. We created a bar, right? Of here is what it means.
A low one.
Well, we have to start, right?
Absolutely true. Like, the certification is meant for a 2 to 3 year practitioner.
Right.
You need to show the basics, because once you show the basics, then you contextualize that to your business. Then you speak that. That becomes powerful.
What IDPro provided a horizon vision.
Yeah.
Right? To your point, if I began to go out and proselytize and evangelize that identity can take its rightful place by practitioners understanding the value of a source of truth, we're providing a mission. We're providing a vision, right? If I asked anybody what the overarching vision is for identity, I'm going to get 27,000 different answers, right? But if I as a organization, like I'll go to, somebody, Bruce Schneier, encryption. Like nobody has any questions about, who should I be looking to for encryption knowledge other than Bruce Schneier, right? Because he sets the bar, he sets the standard. He's created this entire focus where cryptanalysis it's his, right? When we provide that vision to people, people will follow. We're not providing, and I think this is incumbent upon all of these great named leaders that we talked about, everybody that's sitting here included, right? For us to say, there is a vision, there is something that we can achieve together that will drive that change. But without that, I think that we'll continue to struggle.
Yeah. Ian, what are your thoughts? Make them quick, concise.
Nice. All right. To me, it's about that clarity of how we express the value we can provide and the goals that we want to help people reach. And Richard, I'm indebted for you to bringing up IDPro, right? Because the way identity practitioners get better at this is by learning from one another. And it provides a safe space for that to happen while we also start to build a pipeline of new practitioners. Once you're AI native, yes, right? I don't know what 30 years is a ridiculous question because I don't know what's going to look. But what I do know is this, that in the next couple of years, we will have practitioners who are growing up not digital native, but AI native. What will they bring to our practice?
Yep.
I have no answer. I just have hope, and I have a keen interest to see what that looks like.
Yeah. In other words, Ian's going to be on an island somewhere sipping Mai Tais. He doesn't care. So,
Aside from ridiculous questions, it was a pleasure. And I think the audience really appreciate that because they want to extract this from your minds. I think, like I said, those names, I don't think we have enough celebrities in identity. I think that's one of the things. If you think about IT, the Steve Jobs or the Bill Gates of the world, who is that in identity, right? So it could be. So I'll return. I mean, guys, sorry. Love you, Aubrey.
catching strays left and right. All right, listen, we're going to wrap this up before anything else happens and HR comes in here and fires all of us. Well, except these students. They can't fire those guys. Listen, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, whatever platform you listen to this on. If you're on YouTube, drop in the comments. You now have a challenge on YouTube. who is the best dressed out of these two and who deserves the eye candy roll. That's all I'm going to say. Make sure you comment if you listen on Spotify or any other podcast platform. We want to keep the conversation going. Until next time, see you guys in the next conversation.
That was fun, eh? Well, it's not just fun, but it's educational. I mean, it's actually educational, right?
Yes.
You don't have to agree with it. It's not necessarily going to be like every answer.
It's not a debate with those guys.
But we don't have, that's why I like that session, because we don't have those conversations. I don't think we strive to try and improve the space in which we work and the identity field in the way that we do. I mean, you and I have this conversation a lot. Like when we present on stage together, you're like, Simon, you're telling people they're wrong. I'm like, yeah, because if we don't challenge people enough, I'm not saying I'm right, but I think we have to challenge more and we have to help people evolve, because the thing I've learned coming into identity is it doesn't move fast enough.
It does.
And it's the people. And I'm not, the people are great and they understand their feelings.
That is very true.
But we need to move faster. So that's why I love that conversation, because that's just all challenge, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with it.
I like what you said. We don't have to agree with what they said. It's just, I think it's just eye-opening, kind of just see how many different type of angles or opinions, and I think that's the rich part of it.
Yeah.
Well, challenge is progression, right? That's the only way that you can. If you're ever working on anything and you get to a point where there is no more challenge, there's no more growth, you're not moving anything anyway. You're just that's the definition of a plateau.
Yeah.
Right. So you're right. You have to challenge all the time. Like when I was a consultant, right, and that was most of my identity experience, like being a consultant, which I'm grateful for because I got a chance to see a whole bunch of different things. I would tell people, like, number one, the customer's always right as bullshit. They're not. The customer's right about their pain. Yeah. Right? Your job is to help them figure out what the solution is. Right? And I always use this analogy, right? And I say the reason why that's true is because let's say, like, you need to go to the doctor, right? You hurt your foot. Your foot's hurting, you go to the doctor and you go in, hey doc, listen, man, my foot's really hurting, so here's what I'm thinking we should do. I want to get an MRI, I want to get these scans, I want to get this done. If you got a good doctor, they're going to sit down and go, okay, hey, guess what, buddy? One of us went to med school. The other one didn't. Yeah. So you sit down, let me do what I do, and figure out what the actual, now you're absolutely right about your pain. Tell me where the pain is. You are absolutely right about your pain because you're the only one that feels it. But now that I can understand what the pain and where it is, now I can do a diagnosis and go, yeah, it's not your foot. What happens is you pull this muscle in your back and you're overcompensating, so that's why your foot is hurting. So if we do this, now it's going to fix it. And that right there, that's the essence of, like, challenges. So you can't just walk into something and go, well, this is how it is. It's like, well, why is it that way?
But that's frightening as well, right? As a practitioner, it's frightening and I see a lot of that fear quite often. Like, I've got to now think about the input I've got and come up with a solution that isn't just the same solution I give every time I get an input. Like, I think that's part of the growth opportunity here is helping people understand, well, here's what you can do, but you now need to take the input and then adapt to what the requirement is. But that's scary, right? I mean,
I guess.
it can be scary. I see fear out there, right?
It can be scary.
But you guys agree what is about Bruce Schneider? I think that we have some sort of lighthouse figure in cryptography, and we don't have that in identity. You guys agree with that?
Yeah, because identity hasn't been. If you look at identity as a whole, right? I mean, because I was gonna go, you can look at engineering as a whole, right? As it grew as a practice, identity is only, the way we talk about it now, like only about 30 years old.
Yeah.
Right. In the grand schemes of everything else, that's really, really young.
Yeah, very
and so
yeah.
we're really just now figuring out what this thing is, right? I would say only in the last 10 have we just said this is identity encompasses these things. Now, just in this conversation, what's identity, security, all this stuff, whatever. So this thing is constantly evolving and changing. So till it gets to a point of stability, then we can truly get somebody to stand up and go, this is the way it should be.
That's a good reference, because if you think about cryptography, right? So like Julius Caesar, it's a little bit older than 30 years. Yes. Yeah.
We are going to have you have some up-to-date references every single podcast, because I love that one. Julius Caesar, that is great.
So yeah, there you go.
Is that where Lewis started? Oh. Anyway, that's the fun, guys. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I genuinely.
Those guys, I just watched this, and I think that was the idea, right? That we make them talk.
Actually, I want to tell this. We'll wrap up with this. I'm going to tell this real. Here's the real story of why Richard Burke's called the Godfather of Identity. Because the first time he went through this whole thing of like the guy with the bow tie. So he wore a bow tie. First time I saw this guy talk was in a Roost Chris at a lunch, whatever, one of these lunch things. We buy food. Nobody's really paying attention because they're eating a steak. Richard gets up in a smoking jacket, a bow tie with a Manhattan in his hand, and starts talking about like identity security. And literally, that's where the whole Godfather thing was born. Because everybody's like, who is this schmuck? What is he doing? And is he really drinking at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Manhattan? And it just stuck. Now he doesn't wear both sides anymore. It's a risk. And the room. It wasn't because he threatened the room.
That's how I met him too. Yeah, like around when he was the bull tie guy.
That's it.
Yeah,
All right, guys.
good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff.
That was fun. Thank
Right.
you.